match the rules that the U.S. has imposed on us?
So as you know, throughout the pandemic, we have been making our own decision based on our own analysis and circumstances, and the U.S. has been doing so. We have coordinated, especially through the land borders. We continue to coordinate and facilitate. At the moment, we currently have measures for travelers who are coming from the U.S. We require vaccination, we require pre-departure test, and we have random mandatory testing on travelers coming to the U.S. through the land or through air. So for now, those are the measures in place. We will constantly assess, and if we feel that we need to adjust those, we will do so.
And so I'm clear, because Canada already has the testing requirement, you don't believe that the on-arrival testing requirement is needed for the U.S.?
No, it's because of the current, so the advice that we got is depending on the epidemiology, and I always have a hard time with that word, of the source country or the origin country. For now, the U.S. is not on a list where we are updating or upgrading our testing requirements. So for now, that it stays as is. However, as I said to you and others before, we are preparing in case that needs to be adjusted.
Do we actually have the testing capacity to do on-arrival testing for that number of passengers that would then need to be covered if we're also including the U.S.?
Well, that's part of the preparation that we're doing. We're making sure that we will, if we need to, have the capacity necessary. That's why we're coordinating with provinces. That's why we're coordinating with local communities on land borders. So we are preparing to make sure that we have the capacity if we need it.
Is it not just a matter of time? We're preparing for the capacity, but looks like there's community spread in the U.S. Are we not just delaying the inevitable and having border closed at some point?
I mean, one thing we learned throughout the pandemic is it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. And what we want to do is we want to, again, be guided by science and data. So today, it is not, based on the advice that we got, it is current measures for the U.S. is adequate. However, we will be prepared if circumstances change, if the advice that we got change, we will be prepared to change the circumstances.
In what way is the U.S. materially doing better on COVID, the spread of COVID, than European countries? I'm just a bit confused as to what specifically in the epidemiology in the U.S. is actually better than all these other countries that we've applied these extra rules to.
So as you're aware, these changes happen because of the Omicron variant. And the Omicron variant is still, we don't have a lot of data saying that there's significant presence for it in the U.S. If that changes, we will act accordingly.
Canada's Airports Council says they're completely in the dark about how our on-arrival testing is going to work. Like, what's going on there? When will it be operational? Why aren't they aware of it?
Look, I understand these have been very challenging times for our aviation sector, for our airports. From day one, we've been there for them, and we will continue to partner with them. We are in constant discussions with them. We are coordinating with them about implementation and what needs to happen, but I know there's a lot of anxiety. We will continue to partner with airports to make sure that they have the resources they need. Thank you.
But it's not in place that the airports are saying they're not implementing it.
Il y a des nouvelles mesures imposées par les Américains à la frontière. Les Canadiens vont devoir passer. Oui, il va y avoir une nouvelle mesure. Les Canadiens vont devoir passer des tests s'ils veulent rentrer aux États-Unis. Est-ce que tu penses qu'il devrait y avoir la même mesure de notre côté?
Je pense qu'en ce moment, le gouvernement américain agit de la meilleure façon possible pour la sécurité des citoyens. Alors, je pense que le Canada devrait agir de la même façon. En ce moment, on a mis en place des mesures de sécurité pour tous les voyageurs, sauf les Américains. Je pense que ces mesures-là devraient être adressées pour tout le monde.
Est-ce que tu penses qu'on devrait aussi fermer la frontière aux Américains, étant donné qu'il y a des nouveaux cas de variants qui ont été détectés aux États-Unis, qui ne sont pas liés au voyage?
Je ne pense pas qu'on est rendu à fermer la frontière, mais il y a certainement lieu d'y avoir une meilleure communication. Il y a eu plusieurs rencontres dans les dernières semaines entre le Canada et les États-Unis. C'est la plus grande frontière commune entre les deux pays. Et il semble y avoir un manque de communication ou du moins un manque de considération de la part des États-Unis envers le Canada parce que les mesures qui sont mises en place sont clairement pas les mêmes et on s'attendrait à peut-être une entente bilatérale, ce qui n'est pas le cas. Alors je pense que le Canada devrait agir avec les Américains comme il le fait pour tous les autres voyageurs.
And just to be clear on your position, so you would like the same rules applied to the Americans? Can you just clarify in English?
Yes, I think Canada should apply the same rules that are being applied right now to all kinds of travelers, to the American travelers as well, in the optic to, like, I'm sorry, I don't speak English often.
For French, I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Yeah.
And are you also saying that you want there to be more consistency between the American and Canadian rules? Right now they're different on how many days in advance and what kinds of tests.
A collaboration, communication between the two countries, since they share that border between the two countries. So I think bilateral communication could be better for all travelers.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Should we be stopping travel from the U.S. now that there's a second case of Omicron that doesn't appear travel related?
Travel was always an immediate metric or immediate measure to buy us some time, but it's not sufficient on its own, and that's why I've been calling for better testing and quarantining. That's the way to really clamp down on the spread. And then finally, what's most important is that we have to do our part to tackle the global pandemic with waiving the patent protection for vaccines so that countries with less resources can make the vaccine in their own countries.
Should we get U.S. air travelers to get tested one day prior to coming to Canada the way they're going to start requiring of us?
Yeah, I think we need to have stronger measures around testing, and I'm looking to the public health guidelines around what's the best way to do that. But better testing and better quarantining are two things that throughout the pandemic have been an ongoing, consistent problem for the Liberals.
You're saying you want better quarantine. Does that mean you want 14-day quarantine for anyone coming back to Canada?
What we've seen with quarantining and other measures, they've been inconsistent. And from what I've heard from public health experts is that inconsistent policies around quarantining or around testing don't actually help us keep people safe. So I want whatever is in the best interest and what we can achieve, but I want it to be consistent. I want it to follow the evidence, and right now it hasn't been consistent and clear.
There are lots of countries in Europe right now considering mandatory vaccination for adults. Is that something in Canada that you think that we should do?
I feel we are at a really good level of vaccine acceptance. People are there, people are getting vaccinated. We're over 80%. So I just want to encourage everyone to get vaccinated, encourage people to get the vaccine booster. But we also have to encourage that level of vaccination around the world. We've got countries where they don't even have 10% of people vaccinated. That's really the bigger problem that we're up against.
So you were saying you want more testing, you want more quarantine. Is there anything specific you want? Is there a timeline for quarantine? Is there any kind of specific testing stuff that you want brought in?
Just to address the problems of inconsistency and the lack of clarity around the rules. That's been the ongoing problem. It makes it hard for travelers, it makes it hard for the industry, and it means that we're not doing everything possible to keep people safe.
What about sending Canadians rapid tests?
What's that?
What about sending Canadians rapid tests at home? The U.S. is about to do that. We have millions.
Yeah, it might be something we could consider. Yeah.
What about,
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. About the conversion therapy ban?
We're hearing from business groups, from travel groups, that the government should be aligning its rules with the United States for travel, that it's too confusing and that it creates too many sort of barriers. Why aren't they aligned? Why do we have different rules, different tests, different hours needed between tests between the two countries?
Well, I think Canadians would understand it when it comes to the health and safety of people. Every nation is sovereign. We always take decisions on the basis of sciences and listening to the best sciences in order to make these very specific decisions. That being said, you will see that in many fields we have been talking to the United States. I was just in Washington meeting with the Secretary of Commerce, for example. We've agreed, I think for the first time, I'm told in Canadian history, that a Secretary of Commerce and a Minister of Industry would meet on a quarterly basis now to look at supply chain, to look at how we can optimize the different supply chain on both sides. How can we work together when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to, for example, steel, aluminum? How can we, build together the battery ecosystem? How can we look ahead when it comes to hydrogen? Because the big thing when it comes to Canada and the United States is how can we innovate more together? How can we build more together? And how can we sell more together to the world?
Science different. What is different between the science in the U.S. that's gathered on the same global pandemic that is here that leads to a 3-day test versus a 1-day test versus a PCR test versus an antigen test?
Well, I would say I think Canadians who are watching understand that one thing that Canadians cherish is that we are sovereign in how we make these decisions. I appreciate that you could look at science and you can look at data, but Canadians would say they would want this government and the provincial partners to make decisions looking at what's in their best interest, considering the health and safety. You've seen that on the basis of science and data, different governments have decided to do it differently. But one thing that Canadians know is that we have now one of the most vaccinated population in the world. And if you look at our track records, we have taken decisions that protect the health and safety. And the best way to restart the economy and to restart tourism is to actually keep the fact that we are seen as one of the countries in the world which has best managed the pandemic when it comes to numbers and when you look at the measures we have taken for Canadians. So on one end, yeah, you want to look at science, but I think Canadians will want us to remain sovereign in how we make decisions for them.
On a un énoncé économique qui va arriver le 14 décembre. On avait un gouvernement qui disait qu'il faut se dépêcher pour revenir au travail. Vous déposez l'énoncé économique de l'automne quasiment en hiver, alors qu'il reste une semaine, même pas avant de siéger. Est-ce que c'est pas un peu manquer de respect envers les Canadiens de déposer ça si tard?
Bien, vous comprenez d'abord, les Canadiens et les Canadiennes, les gens qui nous regardent comprennent bien qu'on a pris plusieurs mesures. S'il y a une chose qui a été claire pendant la pandémie, c'est qu'on serait là avec eux tout au long de la pandémie, puis aussi longtemps que ça demanderait d'être là. Tout au cours de la pandémie, on a pris des mesures qui étaient importantes pour protéger les travailleurs, protéger les familles, protéger les entreprises à travers le pays. Et là, présentement, comme une des mesures qui serait les plus importantes, et c'est pour ça qu'on demande aux partis, s'ils veulent favoriser la relance économique, bien, c'est d'approuver le projet de loi C2 qui va justement, lui, contenir aussi des ajustements pour aider les familles canadiennes. Alors, moi, je pense que les gens qui nous regardent comprennent que l'économie mondiale est en pleine transformation. Le fait qu'on prenne le temps de bien faire les choses pour présenter une énoncé économique aux Canadiens, aux Canadiennes, en temps opportun, c'est une bonne chose. Mais bien, écoutez, les choses avancent rapidement. Vous pouvez le constater avec moi. Depuis la pandémie, on vient de voir, il y a une autre vague. On vient de voir un nouveau variant. Tout ça, ça a un impact. Vous avez vu les chaînes d'approvisionnement. J'étais récemment à Washington, justement avec la secrétaire du Commerce, pour voir comment on peut mieux harmoniser nos politiques pour justement s'assurer que on voit que les chaînes d'approvisionnement qui étaient globales deviennent plus régionales. On parle plus de résilience versus efficacité. Alors, tout ça, ça a un impact sur l'économie. Le fait qu'on prenne le temps de présenter aux Canadiens, aux Canadiennes, que le ministre des Finances le fera, je pense que c'est une bonne chose pour donner cette perspective-là, non seulement sur le court terme, le moyen terme, mais évidemment le long terme.
But can I ask you, on the fall update, the government called an election saying that big changes were needed, we needed to move ahead, get things going quickly. Then we had 2-month wait, now we have 4 weeks in the House of Commons, and it's at the very end that we're going to get the actual spending document, and we still don't have the public accounts. So I'm just wondering, why is that? Why is it that these massive documents and important pieces of transparency are coming so late in the game?
Well, the first thing that I would say for anyone who's watching and even the opposition is that if they want to help us to make sure that we have the tools to foster economic growth, to protect Canadian and businesses across the country, is to approve pending the Bill C2, which is pending in the House. That would be the first thing to make sure that we have the right authority to approve these programs. Now, when it comes to the economy, I think we've been acting all along. One thing Canadians have seen, we have their back all the way. As long.
The House of Commons. And
sorry?
The things that you need the House of Commons for, you push to the very end. Why is that?
Well, we've been taking measures all along to protect the safety and the well-being of Canadians. I think Canadians understand that. Now, we're going to present that. I think Canadians have seen and we have taken action. Look at supply chain. We did not wait to come back in the House. We took immediate action to make sure that we'd restore supply chain. Just look at aluminum and steel. We're going to be the first country to produce green steel, green aluminum. We're working on the battery ecosystem, the hydrogen economy. I would say that we've been working since day one to make sure that we'd be in the best position to come out. And certainly in my role is to prepare Canada's economy for the 21st century. Takes this one-in-a-generation opportunity to transform our economy towards electrification. And really, the big challenge is to take the climate goals of Glasgow and see how you transform that into opportunities for workers, for growth, and businesses. That's what we've been doing. And obviously, the fall economic statement will just add to that. But we've been taking actions, and Canadians have seen it. I mean, the fact that we're going to be the first country in the world to produce green steel and aluminum should say a lot about how much we have prepared to make sure we would succeed in this new economy. Merci tout le monde. Merci. Merci.
Quelqu'un a une question pour M.
Par rapport aux nouvelles mesures que les États-Unis vont implanter pour les voyageurs qui viennent du Canada, test obligatoire, même si on vient du Canada. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on devrait faire la même chose au Canada aussi, même si on vient des États-Unis, test obligatoire, même si c'est moins de 70 %?
Bien, écoutez, c'est une option qu'on doit envisager, évidemment, mais c'est au gouvernement libéral de prendre ses responsabilités. Ils nous disent qu'ils veulent écouter la santé publique, mais pour l'instant, il n'y a pas de directive qui est claire. Ce qu'on veut, c'est que les Québécois et les Canadiens sachent à quoi s'en tenir. Là, il y a beaucoup de confusion et je pense que c'était au ministre des Transports à être capable de dire aux gens, voici la situation actuelle, voici où on s'en va, voici les options qui sont sur la table et voici qu'est-ce qu'on devrait faire ou qu'est-ce qu'on va faire. Pour l'instant, là, les gens, ils regardent ça aller puis ils se posent beaucoup de questions puis le gouvernement ne donne pas de réponse.
Mais vous, votre réponse, qu'est-ce que c'est? Par rapport au test, est-ce que vous pensez qu'on doit les imposer? Même si on vient des États-Unis?
C'est une option qui doit être sur la table. L'important, c'est d'écouter la science et la santé publique. Mais pour l'instant, le gouvernement ne prend pas de décision. Ce n'est pas à moi à prendre la décision, c'est au gouvernement puis au ministre des Transports. Tant qu'il fait rapidement puis qu'il clarifie les choses, c'est ça qui est important.
On envoie un énoncé économique le 14 décembre. Un, vous attendez à quoi? Et deux, est-ce que c'est trop tard?
Bien, il y a beaucoup de choses qui sont trop tard avec le gouvernement libéral. Premièrement, rappeler la Chambre ici, ça a pris 2 mois, c'était pas mal long, après une élection qui était injustifiée. Donc, on n'a pas siégé ici depuis le mois de juin. Et là, on attend jusqu'au 14 décembre. Les gens, là, dans la vraie vie, ils en arrachent. Ils peinent à payer l'épicerie, leur loyer, et on a un gouvernement qui se traîne les pieds. Alors, nous autres, on aurait voulu avoir plus d'actions plus vite sur un paquet d'enjeux. Notamment le logement. La crise du logement est toujours là, puis c'est la plus grosse dépense des familles ou des individus. Donc, si on n'agit pas là-dessus, le reste, ça ne sert pas à grand-chose. Puis, ils sont en train de faire des coupures aux gens, des coupures pour les aînés qui ont reçu la PCRE, puis là, ils se font couper le supplément de revenu garanti, des coupures aux familles qui se font couper le chèque de prestations canadiennes pour enfants parce qu'ils ont touché la PCRE. C'est quoi ce gouvernement-là qui dit qu'il veut être en aide aux gens, puis qu'en même temps, il fait des coupures comme ça sur le côté, en dessous de la table, qui blessent les gens alors que les gens souffrent en ce moment?
English on that. Why do you think the government's waiting until the last week of this 4-week sitting to have to follow up?
I don't know. They are dragging their feet. You know, it took 2 months to come back here to work in Parliament. We still don't have any committee organized, and they are waiting this, last week before the Christmas break to do that. And people outside, the families, the seniors, they are suffering. People are really struggling to pay their bills, to pay the grocery, to pay their rent, and this Liberal government is completely out of touch. They are not answering the real needs of the people out there. C'est bon? Merci. Je prends ça avant de bouger.
Good day, bonjour. Merci beaucoup d'être venu. Après près de 500 milliards de dollars de déficit inflationniste, Justin Trudeau veut dépenser davantage. Et on apprend avec l'augmentation des prix de l'essence, de nourriture, d'immobilier, que quand Justin dépense, les Canadiens payent. Alors, on apprend aujourd'hui qu'il va y avoir une mise à jour économique. Les conservateurs revendiquent que le gouvernement mette fin à ces dépenses inflationnistes qui augmentent le coût de vie des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Nous voulons un plan pour éliminer les déficits et pour arrêter de gonfler les prix avec trop de dollars qui cherchent après trop peu de produits. We've learned that today that after about $500 billion of inflationist deficits that have driven up the cost of living for Canadians, Justin Trudeau wants to spend even more. We know that when he spends more, Canadians pay more. Look at the price of gas, groceries, housing, pretty much anything. It has all been inflated as too many dollars chase too few goods and services. Now with this fall economic update, Trudeau seems to want to add more to the problem by spending uncontrolled sums on things we don't need at great expense to the Canadian people. So Conservatives are demanding an end to the inflationary deficits so that we can bring the cost of living back under control. Our solution, as always, is an economy that makes more, costs less, with paychecks and not debt.
What do you think of the timing of this? That this is coming the last week of the 4-week sitting, and also we don't have any public accounts. It sounds like that'll come towards the end as well.
Yeah, I mean, two questions there. It looks like the Trudeau government wants to deliver a big sack of inflationary coal for every family just in time for Christmas. The government has added $500 billion in debt already, which is driving up the cost of living. And now, right before Christmas, they want to pile on billions more in costly inflation. We think that the government should have been more organized to get into Parliament and announce a fall economic update earlier on so that we can get the deficit down and restore the cost of living of Canadians.
Vous dites qu'il faut couper les dépenses. Il y a le projet de loi C2 qui était là, qui donne de l'argent supplémentaire à l'industrie du tourisme, de l'hôtellerie, etc. Si vous vouliez vraiment couper les dépenses, vous auriez pu voter contre ça.
On l'a fait.
Donc pourquoi voter en faveur de dépenses?
Mais écoutez, nous proposons que le gouvernement devrait dépenser moins. On devrait retourner les dépenses au niveau qu'on avait auparavant le COVID. On n'a pas besoin de continuer pour éternellement les programmes et les dépenses sans contrôle. Il faut retourner à la normale.
Mais donc, ça veut dire couper quoi si ce n'est pas l'aide aux touristes?
Mais il faut arrêter de payer les gens pour ne pas travailler. On a déjà dit que les gouvernements devraient plus donner l'argent aux gens qui sont capables de travailler. Il faut aussi arrêter d'envoyer les chèques à la crime organisée, aux prisonniers et aux entreprises qui ont assez d'argent pour payer des dividendes et des bonus.
What do you want to see in this economic statement, since you don't want to see any money spending? What would you like to see them do with it?
We want to see less spending. We want to see a return to normal pre-COVID levels of spending so that we can get inflation under control and allow Canadians an affordable cost of living.
You know, on C2, there was a deal announced. Obviously, there is a finance committee. You were talking about this yesterday.
Yeah.
Did you get everything that you wanted, or what exactly is happening?
Well, we're going to continue to work in committee, of course. One of the demands we had was that committee would return, and that would allow us to make amendments to the bill to protect against organized crime, taking advantage of the CERB, against people who are able to work, getting money to stay home, and to get investigations of where the money actually went. One of the, to be more specific, Bill, you reported today that we still don't have public accounts, which is extraordinary. It means that there's been $600 billion of spending without details. Where did the money go? And we're going to use our power at Finance Committee to find out.
Vous avez dit que vous voulez que les députés soient de retour en présence en Chambre. On vient de voir certains de vos députés, vos collègues voter de leur voiture. Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est acceptable?
J'ai pas vu ça. Je me concentrais. Mais j'étais en train de concentrer sur mon travail, alors j'ai pas regardé comment les autres ont voté.
Est-ce que vous pensez que tous vos collègues devraient être présents en Chambre, vos collègues conservateurs?
Si possible, on encourage tous les gens à faire leur travail pour représenter leurs commettants. D'autres questions? Excellent, merci beaucoup.
Thinking about as we're hearing about non-travel Omicron cases now in the U.S.
Well, as we have said, we're going to continue to follow the advice of our public health experts, which of course continues to reassess the new Omicron variant. We're getting that advice in real time. We've put in place some additional measures around the restrictions involving the listed countries of concern. We've added some additional mandatory testing for all travelers on all flights except for the United States who are returning to Canada. Those are additional layers of protection to ensure that we are guarding the health and safety of all Canadians. And we're going to just continue to listen to the advice that we're getting from our healthcare experts.
The U.S. is starting to ask Canadian travelers now to get a test the day before they travel by air. Any reciprocity plan?
Well, we saw that, and of course we're going to continue to stay in good contact with the United States. I know that my colleagues both in the ministries of health and transport will be speaking with their counterparts, and we'll make sure that we try to find alignment wherever we can. But at the end of the day, we're going to listen to the advice that we're getting from our healthcare experts and be guided by that evidence and that science as it relates to the new variant of concern. Merci beaucoup.
How hopeful are you that the conversion therapy bill will pass quickly at the Senate level?
Well, I want to thank all the colleagues in the House first yesterday for passing this historic C4 legislation, and now it's up to senators to pass the legislation. I've spoken with a number of senators, and they're looking at creative ways to go through the process and to make sure that survivors are not traumatized through the process. I'm encouraging senators to pass this legislation as quickly as possible. We need to make sure that Canadians are protected, and that's the objective of the legislation, and that's why it's so great what happened yesterday here in the House of Commons.
If I may, the holdup was with Conservative senators specifically. Is that who you're speaking to?
Look, all senators have a right to speak to legislation in their chamber, and so it's important that senators of all stripes, have their say on the matter, but that they move quickly because survivors and Canadians are asking them to do so. Thank you.